The Galactic Council chambers hummed with tension as representatives from a dozen species gathered around the central holographic display. At its center, a three-dimensional map of the Kepler nexus rotated slowly, its ancient structures casting eerie shadows in the blue light. Ambassador Vex Tar of the Crithian Empire stood at the podium, his chitinous armor gleaming under the chamber's harsh illumination. His species had ruled the eastern quadrants for over 3 millennia, their reputation as apex predators unquestioned throughout known space. Yet today, even his voice carried an undertone of unease. "The trial of echoes remains what it has always been," he announced, his mandibles clicking with each word, a testament to the failures of evolution itself. No species, no matter how advanced, how deadly, how perfectly adapted for survival, has ever emerged from those halls. The hologram shifted, zooming in on a massive crystalline structure that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. The ancient trial, as most beings knew it, had stood on the dead world of Kepler Prime for over 50,000 years. Its creators had vanished long before any current civilization had developed interstellar travel, leaving behind only this single, incomprehensible test. Commander Zephys of the Altarian war clans leaned forward in her seat, her predatory yellow eyes fixed on the display. 17 species have sent their finest warriors into that structure, she growled, her voice like grinding stone. The Blood Hunters of Proxima 7. The Void Stalkers of the Cygnus Arm. Even the legendary Apex Raptors of Kepler 4, all of them bred for killing, evolved for survival, enhanced for perfection, and all of them are now nothing but crystallized remains decorating the trial's entrance hall, added General Korath, his massive frame making the reinforced chair creak. The Korathian Dominion had produced some of the galaxy's most feared shock troops, beings that could tear through starship hulls with their bare claws. My grandfather's clutch brother attempted the trial 2 centuries ago. We found him turned to living crystal, frozen mid-strike against an enemy we couldn't even see. The chamber fell silent as the weight of those words settled over the assembled representatives. Each species present had lost their most elite predators to the trial. It had become a symbol of ultimate dominance that none could claim, a reminder that even apex evolution had its limits. Ambassador Nyx of the Serpentine Hegemony raised one of her 4 arms, her scales shifting from deep purple to angry red. The trial's purpose remains unknown, but its message is clear. It judges predatory capability, survival instinct, and hunting prowess. Every species that has attempted it possessed these qualities in abundance. Yet the trial found them all. Which is why, Vextar continued, the recent application from the human delegation is both fascinating and deeply concerning. The hologram shifted again, this time displaying a data file marked with the insignia of the Terran Federation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as various translation devices struggled to process the alien text and biological data. "Humans," Zephys spat, her ears flattening against her skull. "They've been part of galactic civilization for less than 50 standard years. They have no real military tradition, no evolutionary adaptations for apex predation, no enhanced physical capabilities whatsoever. They're barely above the technological threshold for spaceflight. Their homeworld is a garden paradise," added another delegate from the back of the chamber. "No environmental pressures that would forge true predators. They evolved from omnivorous scavengers, not hunters." General Korath's laugh was a sound like boulders crashing together. "I've seen human soldiers in action. Adequate, perhaps, for defending their small colonies, but hardly impressive by galactic standards. They rely entirely on their technology, rather than natural ability. Strip away their weapons and armor, and they're nothing but soft-skinned mammals. Yet their application stands," Vextar said, gesturing to the holographic display. "Filed through proper diplomatic channels, with all required documentation. They specifically request permission to attempt the trial of echoes. Have they even been informed of the consequences?" asked Nyx, her tongue flicking out to taste the air nervously. "Do they understand that no being has ever returned from that place? That their warrior will join the collection of crystallized failures?" "What? Their ambassador insists they do," Vextar replied. "In fact, when I met with Ambassador Chen yesterday, she seemed oddly confident about their chances." The mention of Ambassador Sarah Chen drew more murmurs from the assembled delegates. The human diplomat had quickly gained a reputation for her unconventional approaches to galactic politics. Where other species sent their most intimidating representatives, Earth had chosen a middle-aged former teacher who spoke with the measured patience of someone explaining basic concepts to children. Confidence born of ignorance, Korath declared. These humans have no conception of what true predatory evolution produces. They've never faced a real apex species in combat. Actually, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance. That's not entirely accurate. Every head turned as Ambassador Chen stepped into the chamber. Her simple dark suit, a stark contrast to the elaborate armor and ceremonial garments worn by the other delegates. She moved with unhurried steps to the speaker's platform, seemingly unaware of the dozens of predatory gazes fixed upon her. Ambassador Chen, Vextar said, his mandibles spreading slightly in what might have been surprise. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow's formal session. I apologize for the intrusion, Chen replied, bowing slightly to the assembled delegates. But I overheard some of the discussion while passing through the corridor. I thought it might be helpful to address some misconceptions about my species. Misconceptions? Zephas's voice carried a dangerous edge. Humans are prey animals. Your own evolutionary history confirms this. You lack fangs, claws, natural armor, enhanced senses, or any of the other hallmarks of apex predation. Chen nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right about our physical limitations. We're not fast, strong, or naturally armed compared to most species in this chamber. We certainly don't look like apex predators. Then why? Korath rumbled. Do you believe your species can succeed where the galaxy's finest killers have failed? Because, Chen said, her voice taking on that patient, educational tone that had become her trademark. I think there might be a fundamental misunderstanding about what the trial actually tests. The chamber erupted in surprised chatter. Vextar raised one clawed hand for silence. The trial's nature has been extensively studied, Ambassador. Every analysis confirms it measures predatory capability, survival instinct, and hunting prowess. The crystallized remains of failed challengers all show signs of dying in combat. Yes, they died fighting, Chen agreed. But what if that's exactly the problem? The question hung in the air like an unexploded weapon. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unused to having their fundamental assumptions challenged so directly. Explain, Nyx demanded, her scales now cycling through rapid color changes that indicated extreme agitation. Chen activated her portable holographic projector, displaying a series of images from Earth's history. My species has a saying. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. For 3 million years, every problem we encountered on our homeworld was solved through tool use, cooperation, and adaptation, rather than physical dominance. The images showed humans in various environments, Arctic explorers in protective gear, deep-sea researchers in submarines, astronauts working in the vacuum of space. We didn't evolve to be apex predators because we found better ways to survive. We became apex adapters instead. Adaptation is not predation, Korath growled. The trial judges killing ability, not problem-solving. Does it? Chen asked. Or does it judge something else entirely? Something that every apex predator species in this room shares, but humans lack? Before anyone could respond, Chen continued. Every species that has attempted the trial approached it the same way as a combat scenario to be won through superior fighting ability. They saw a challenge and responded with violence. Because that's what successful predators do. And what would humans do differently? Vextar asked, though his tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. We'd ask why the trial exists in the first place, Chen said simply. We'd wonder what its creators actually wanted to test. We'd look for patterns, alternative solutions, ways to succeed without fighting at all. The silence that followed was profound. For generations, the trial of echoes had been seen as the ultimate test of combat prowess. The idea that it might be something else entirely was almost incomprehensible to species that had built their entire civilizations around predatory dominance. You're suggesting, Nyx said slowly, That 50,000 years of galactic civilization has misunderstood the trial's basic nature? I'm suggesting, Chen replied, that 50,000 years of apex predators have all made the same fundamental assumption. Sometimes, it takes an outsider to see what everyone else has missed. Zephys laughed, but the sound carried none of her earlier confidence. Even if you're right about the trial's nature, you're still talking about sending one human against a test that has claimed the lives of legendary warriors. Who among your species would even volunteer for such a mission? Chen's smile was small but unmistakably proud. Actually, we've already selected our representative. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, of the Terran Space Force. He should be arriving at the orbital station within the hour. A soldier? Korath seemed surprised. I thought you said this wasn't about combat. Marcus isn't a traditional soldier, Chen explained. He's what we call a puzzle solver. His military specialty is resolving conflicts through unconventional methods. Before joining the Space Force, he was a civilian disaster response coordinator. His job was finding ways to save lives when all the obvious solutions had failed. The holographic display shifted to show a personnel file. The human male pictured there looked utterly unremarkable by galactic standards. Medium height, lean build, brown hair, and calm brown eyes. No visible weapons, no ceremonial scars, no signs of genetic enhancement or cybernetic augmentation. This is your champion? Zephys asked incredulously. He looks like a maintenance worker, Korath finished. No offense intended, Ambassador, but this individual appears completely ordinary by any measure. That's exactly why he's perfect for this task, Chen said. Marcus has spent his entire career solving problems that couldn't be fought, overcome by brute force, or intimidated into submission. If the trial requires something other than predatory dominance, he's our best chance of figuring out what that might be. Vextar studied the human's file with growing interest. His service record is unusual. Multiple commendations for creative problem-solving, conflict de-escalation, and what your military calls thinking outside the box, but no significant combat decorations. Because he rarely needs to fight, Chen explained. Marcus finds other ways to win. The chamber fell silent again as the implications of Chen's words sank in. For species that had built their entire identities around predatory excellence, the idea that a non-combative approach might succeed where violence had failed was deeply unsettling. When does he attempt the trial? Nix asked finally. Tomorrow morning, Chen replied, if the council approves our application. Vextar looked around the chamber, noting the mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and unease on his colleagues' faces. This is highly irregular. The trial has always been attempted by proven warriors, not problem solvers, which might be exactly why they all failed, Chen pointed out gently. Another long pause. Then Korath spoke, his voice unusually thoughtful. If this human succeeds, it will fundamentally change our understanding of the trial. If he fails, when he fails, Zephys corrected firmly, he'll join the others as a crystallized monument to overconfidence. Chen's expression didn't change. Marcus has reviewed all available data on the trial, including the detailed scans of previous attempts. He believes he understands what went wrong. And what was that? Vextar asked. They all tried to beat the trial instead of learning from it, Chen said. They saw it as an enemy to defeat, rather than a lesson to understand. The voting process that followed was swift but tense. In the end, curiosity won out over skepticism. The human application was approved by a narrow margin, with several delegates expressing their desire to witness this unconventional attempt firsthand. As the session adjourned and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Vextar approached Chen privately. Ambassador, I feel compelled to warn you once more. The trial has claimed the lives of beings who could tear your Lieutenant Webb apart without effort. Warriors who could survive in the vacuum of space, who could hunt successfully on a dozen different worlds, who possessed reflexes and senses far beyond human capability. Chen nodded respectfully. I understand your concern, Ambassador, but I think you might be surprised by what Marcus can accomplish when he's not trying to be something he isn't. And what is he trying to be? Chen's smile returned, carrying that same quiet confidence that had puzzled so many galactic diplomats. Himself. Sometimes, that's enough. As Chen left the chamber to prepare for the next day's trial, the remaining delegates exchanged uncertain glances. In less than 24 hours, they would either witness the first successful completion of the Trial of Echoes, or add another crystallized failure to its growing collection. None of them could predict which outcome was more likely. And that uncertainty was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. The transport shuttle touched down on Kepler Prime's barren surface with barely a whisper, its advanced dampeners absorbing the impact across the crystalline landing pad. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stepped out onto the ancient world, his environmental suit's heads-up display immediately cataloging the thin atmosphere, low gravity, and elevated radiation levels that made the planet uninhabitable for most species. Behind him, the observation shuttle, carrying the galactic delegates, settled onto an adjacent pad. Through his helmet's visor, Marcus could see their imposing silhouettes through the reinforced windows. Apex predators from across known space, gathered to witness what they expected to be his inevitable failure. "Nervous, Lieutenant?" Ambassador Chen's voice came through his comm system, transmitted from the orbital station where she was monitoring the proceedings. Marcus smiled, checking his equipment one final time. "More curious than nervous. Honestly, I've been thinking about this place for weeks, and I keep coming back to the same question, which is, if this trial was built to test predatory ability, why build it at all?" Marcus began walking toward the massive crystalline structure that dominated the horizon. Any species advanced enough to create something like this would already know which traits make an effective predator. Why test for something you already understand? Through the comm channel, Marcus could hear the interested murmurs from the observation team. His words were being broadcast to all parties, including the delegates who had come to watch his attempt. The Trial of Echoes rose before him like a living thing, its translucent walls pulsing with soft, rhythmic light. The structure was enormous, easily a kilometer tall and half as wide, with no visible entrances save for a single archway at ground level. Around that entrance, exactly as the reports had described, stood the crystallized remains of previous challengers. Marcus stopped before the entrance, studying the frozen figures with professional interest rather than fear. 17 beings from different species, all caught in various poses of attack or defense. Their crystalline forms were perfectly preserved, down to the smallest detail. Each face showed determination, aggression, or desperate fury, the expressions of warriors who had died fighting. "Remarkable preservation," Marcus said, activating his suit's recording systems. "No decay. No weathering despite centuries of exposure. Whatever crystallization process the trial uses, it's incredibly sophisticated." He walked slowly around the entrance, examining each figure. A massive Korathian warrior, claws extended, seemed to be striking at something above his head. A bloodhunter from Proxima 7 crouched low, her natural camouflage patterns still visible beneath the crystal coating. Frozen mid-pounce. An Altarian warclan commander stood with weapon drawn, her expression one of tactical assessment rather than fear. "They all died fighting," Marcus observed. "But fighting what?" The scans show no trace of automated defenses, no weapon systems, no hostile entities inside the structure. "Perhaps," came Vextar's voice over the comm, "they encountered something your scans could not detect." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe. Or maybe they encountered exactly what they expected to encounter, because that's what they were looking for." Without further hesitation, Marcus stepped through the archway. The change was immediate and disorienting. The thin atmosphere of Kepler Prime was replaced by something thick and breathable. Though his suit's sensors couldn't identify its composition, the harsh radiation readings dropped to zero. Most strangely, the gravitational field shifted to something very close to Earth standard, despite the planet's smaller mass. "Environmental controls are active inside the structure," Marcus reported. "Atmosphere, gravity, and temperature are all being adjusted automatically. The trial is definitely responding to my presence." The interior was nothing like what the external scans had suggested. Instead of crystalline walls, Marcus found himself in a vast chamber with smooth, organic-looking surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The ceiling vanished into darkness overhead, and the walls curved away in all directions, creating a space that felt both enclosed and infinite. "Fascinating," Marcus murmured, consulting his suit's instruments. "The internal dimensions don't match the external structure. Either the trial exists partially outside normal space, or it's using spatial folding technology far beyond anything we've encountered." 3 passages led deeper into the structure, each marked with symbols that his translation software couldn't interpret. However, as Marcus approached each doorway, his suit's sensors detected something interesting. "The passages are marked," he reported. "Not with text, but with some kind of environmental signature. The left passage registers elevated adrenaline analogs in the air. The center passage shows stress pheromones. The right passage..." He paused, consulting his readings. "The right passage shows elevated cortisol and other learning-related neurochemicals." On the observation deck of the shuttle, General Korath leaned forward. "Learning chemicals? What does that mean?" Marcus was already heading toward the right passage. "It means the trial isn't just testing. It's teaching." The corridor beyond was lined with what could only be described as viewing alcoves. Each one contained a 3-dimensional holographic display, showing scenes that Marcus gradually realized were historical moments, but not from any civilization he recognized. The technology was clearly ancient, predating even the earliest known galactic civilizations. "The displays are showing the trial's creators," Marcus said, studying the images with growing excitement. "They're not humanoid, not predatory in any obvious sense. In fact, they look more like coral organisms, sessile, collective, possibly aquatic." The scenes showed these coral-like beings in various situations. Unlike the violent confrontations that dominated most species' histories, these displayed cooperation, symbiosis, and what could only be described as problem-solving on a massive scale. Marcus watched as they transformed entire ocean worlds, not through conquest, but through careful ecological management. "They weren't predators at all," Marcus breathed. "They were gardeners, environmental engineers on a planetary scale." "Then why build a trial that tests predatory ability?" Chen asked. Marcus continued through the corridor, noting how each display built upon the previous one, telling a complex story. Because they weren't testing for predatory ability. They were testing for something else. Entirely. The corridor opened into another vast chamber, this one containing what was unmistakably a puzzle. A 3-dimensional maze of light hung suspended in the air, with pathways that shifted and changed according to some pattern Marcus couldn't immediately discern. Around the chamber's perimeter, alcoves held more crystallized remains, previous challengers who had apparently tried to force their way through the maze. "The second challenge," Marcus observed. "And based on the remains, everyone who reached this point tried to solve it through direct action." He spent several minutes simply watching the maze, noting how the light pathways moved in response to each other. Gradually, a pattern emerged, not a combat scenario, but a complex logical sequence that required patience and observation to understand. "It's not a maze," Marcus said suddenly. "It's a data stream. The lights represent information flow, and the pattern shows how different types of data interact with each other." Instead of trying to navigate through the maze, Marcus began adjusting his suit's transmitters to broadcast simple mathematical sequences. The maze responded immediately, its patterns shifting to incorporate his signals. Within minutes, the entire structure had reorganized itself into a stable configuration that created a clear path forward. "Incredible," Vextar whispered over the comm. "He solved it without entering it at all." "Because it wasn't meant to be entered," Marcus replied, walking through the newly formed pathway. "It was meant to be understood." The previous challengers tried to fight their way through a communication system instead of learning how to communicate with it. The third chamber contained the most complex challenge yet. The space was filled with what appeared to be a living ecosystem. Plants that moved like animals, geometric formations that pulsed with biological rhythms, and a constant interplay of energy that created an ever-changing environment. This time, There were no crystallized remains. Marcus realized that this chamber had never been reached by previous challengers. He was the first being in 50,000 years to make it this far. "The final test," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "And it's beautiful." The ecosystem responded to his presence, but not with hostility. Plants oriented toward him like flowers following the sun. The geometric formations began pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. The entire chamber seemed to be trying to establish some form of communication. "It's alive," Marcus whispered. "The whole trial is alive. It's not testing us, it's trying to understand us." He removed his helmet, trusting the environmental controls that had maintained perfect conditions throughout the structure. The air was sweet and clean, carrying scents that reminded him of gardens on Earth. "Lieutenant," Chen's voice carried alarm, "your suit readings show—" "I know," Marcus interrupted gently. "The atmosphere is safe. More than safe, it's been optimized for human physiology. The trial is taking care of me." He walked deeper into the living chamber, noting how the ecosystem continued to adapt to his presence. Where he stepped, the ground became more solid. Where he looked, bioluminescent displays began showing images that seemed designed to be comprehensible to human perception. "The coral beings who built this place," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "They weren't testing for predatory ability. They were looking for minds that could think like they did. Cooperative minds. Minds that would try to understand, rather than conquer." The chamber's center contained a simple pedestal, with what appeared to be a seed pod, biological in appearance, but clearly technological in nature. As Marcus approached it, the entire ecosystem began to sing, a harmonious symphony that resonated through his bones. Every predatory species that entered this place did exactly what their evolution programmed them to do. Marcus continued, reaching toward the pod. They saw challenges and responded with aggression. They encountered the unknown and tried to defeat it, but that's not what the trial was looking for. He lifted the pod, and the chamber exploded into light, not harsh or blinding, but warm and welcoming. The ecosystem began to change, reorganizing itself into new forms that seemed to reach toward him with something that could only be described as joy. "The coral beings wanted to find a species that could think beyond predation," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. "They were gardeners, builders, cooperators. They built this trial to find other species that shared those values." The light began to fade, but the warmth remained. Marcus found himself holding not just the pod, but a wealth of information that flowed directly into his mind. Star charts, technological specifications, philosophical concepts, and something that felt like a greeting from across 50 millennia. They left this place as a gift, Marcus realized. For any species wise enough to accept it, rather than try to take it by force. They've been waiting 50,000 years for someone to say hello instead of trying to prove their dominance. As he turned to leave the chamber, Marcus noticed that the entire trial was changing around him. The walls were becoming transparent, revealing the true structure underneath, not a fortress or arena, but a vast library and laboratory complex. The coral being's entire civilization was preserved here, waiting for the right minds to discover it. "My God," Chen whispered over the comm. "Marcus, do you understand what you've found?" Marcus smiled, carefully placing the seed pod in his suit's sample container. "I think I'm beginning to, but we're going to need a lot more humans out here to really appreciate what they've left us." As he walked back through the transformed structure, Marcus passed by the chambers where previous challengers had died. The crystallization process, he now understood, hadn't been a punishment, it had been preservation. The coral beings had been trying to save the lives of those who had failed their test, keeping them in stasis until someone could succeed and potentially find a way to revive them. "They never wanted anyone to die," Marcus said softly. "They just couldn't figure out how to communicate with minds that only understood violence." When he emerged from the trial, the galactic delegates were waiting in stunned silence. The structure behind him was no longer the opaque crystal fortress they had known for millennia. It had become a transparent beacon, its internal lights visible from orbit, clearly signaling its transformed state to anyone who cared to look. "Lieutenant Webb," Vextar said, his voice carefully controlled. What exactly happened in there? That. Marcus looked back at the structure, then at the assembled representatives of the galaxy's apex predator species. I think, he said slowly, we all need to sit down and have a very long conversation about what it really means to be the dominant species in the galaxy. The seed pod in his container pulsed with gentle light, and Marcus could swear he felt something like approval radiating from the ancient structure. After 50,000 years of waiting, the coral beings had finally found the minds they had been looking for, and those minds, it turned out, belonged to a species that had never considered itself to be predators at all. 3 months after Lieutenant Marcus Webb's successful completion of the Trial of Echoes, the Galactic Council chambers had been reconfigured to accommodate the largest assembly in recorded history. Representatives from over 200 species filled the expanded hall, with thousands more participating through quantum communication links from across the galaxy. The reason for this unprecedented gathering was displayed on the central holographic projector. A three-dimensional map showing the locations of 17 similar structures discovered throughout known space. Each one was now broadcasting the same welcoming signal that had emerged from Kepler Prime after Marcus's success. Ambassador Chen stood at the main podium, no longer the lone representative of an overlooked species. Behind her sat a panel of human specialists, xenobiologists, linguists, engineers, and philosophers, all working to interpret the vast archive of information that the coral beings had left behind. The translation process continues, Chen reported to the assembly. But we've confirmed several key points about what our predecessors were trying to accomplish. She gestured, and the hologram shifted to show artistic representations of the coral being's civilization. The species we've taken to calling the gardeners ruled this galaxy approximately 50,000 years ago. They were not expansionist in any sense we would recognize. Rather than conquering worlds, they cultivated them. General Korath, who had become surprisingly subdued since the trial's completion, leaned forward in his seat. You're saying they transformed entire planets? Transformed and preserved, confirmed Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the team's lead xenobiologist. They didn't impose their will on existing ecosystems. They enhanced them, guided them, helped them reach their full potential. Every world they touched became a paradise by the standards of its native life. This revelation had shaken many of the assembled delegates. For species that had built their civilizations on conquest and dominance, the concept of a galaxy-spanning civilization based on nurturing was almost incomprehensible. Ambassador Nix of the Serpentine Hegemony raised one of her arms. If these gardeners were so advanced, so benevolent, what happened to them? Why did they disappear? Dr. James Wright, the team's historian, took this question. According to their records, they didn't disappear. They evolved beyond the need for physical form. The trial network was their final gift, a way to ensure their knowledge and values would survive to guide whatever civilizations came after them. But only if those civilizations could demonstrate the proper mindset, added Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's philosopher. The trials weren't tests to exclude, but tests to ensure inclusion. They wanted to make sure their legacy went to beings who would use it responsibly. Vextar spoke up from his position in the front row. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond historical interest. Lieutenant Webb's success has activated all 17 structures. Our preliminary scans suggest that each one contains the equivalent of an entire civilization's worth of scientific and cultural knowledge. The chamber buzzed with excited conversation. The prospect of accessing such vast repositories of advanced knowledge was staggering. However, there was an underlying tension that everyone present understood, but few wanted to acknowledge directly. The question, said Commander Zephys, her voice cutting through the chatter, is what happens next. These trials clearly respond only to beings who approach them as the human did. Our finest warriors couldn't even reach the second chamber. Yet Lieutenant Webb walked through all of them without breaking stride. Marcus Webb himself sat quietly in the human delegation section, still somewhat overwhelmed by the attention his achievement had generated. When called upon to address the assembly, he stood with obvious reluctance. I keep getting asked what special technique I used, Marcus said. his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's amplification systems. But there wasn't any technique. I just tried to understand what I was seeing, instead of trying to defeat it. And that approach is apparently unique to your species, rumbled General Korath. No other civilization has produced individuals capable of replicating your success. This was the uncomfortable truth that had dominated private discussions for months. Multiple species had attempted to send their own representatives through the now accessible trials. All had failed. Though none had died, the activated trials seemed capable of protecting unsuccessful candidates rather than crystallizing them. Dr. Rodriguez consulted her notes before speaking. Our analysis suggests that the trials respond to specific neurological patterns associated with cooperative problem-solving rather than competitive dominance. The Gardner records indicate they specifically designed the tests to identify minds that think in terms of symbiosis rather than parasitism. In simpler terms, Marcus added, they were looking for species that ask, "How can we help?" instead of, "How can we win?" The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Every major galactic civilization had been built on principles of competition, conquest, and dominance. The very traits that had made them successful were apparently the traits that prevented them from accessing the Gardener's legacy. Ambassador Yelex of the Andromedian Collective finally voiced what many were thinking. Are you suggesting that only humans can access this knowledge? That an entire galaxy's worth of advanced technology is available exclusively to one species? Chen's response was carefully measured. We're suggesting that the Gardeners designed their trials to respond to certain cognitive patterns that appear to be more common in humans than in other known species. However, this doesn't mean the knowledge is exclusively ours. She activated a new holographic display showing human teams working alongside alien scientists. Over the past 3 months, we've been conducting joint research expeditions to all 17 sites. While only humans can directly interface with the trials, the knowledge we're gaining is being shared with everyone. But under human leadership, Zephas pointed out, you control access to the most significant archaeological discovery in galactic history. The tension in the chamber was palpable. Several delegates were clearly struggling with the implications of humanity's sudden elevation, from galactic newcomer to gatekeeper of ancient wisdom. Marcus stood again, his expression thoughtful. Maybe that's exactly the wrong way to think about it. The Gardeners didn't leave this knowledge to be controlled or hoarded. They left it to be shared and used for everyone's benefit. Dr. Kim nodded in agreement. The trials themselves seem designed to prevent exclusivity. Every time we access new information, it's automatically transmitted to databases that any species can access. The Gardeners built in safeguards against anyone monopolizing their legacy. Additionally, Chen added, our research teams have identified several promising candidates from other species who show cognitive patterns similar to what the trials seem to prefer. With training and preparation, we believe other beings may eventually be able to interface with the structures directly. This news sparked considerable interest throughout the chamber. Ambassador Thrix of the Centaurian Republic leaned forward eagerly. What kind of training? Dr. Wright fielded this question. Primarily meditation techniques, cooperative problem-solving exercises, and what humans call lateral thinking development. The goal is to temporarily suppress competitive instincts and enhance collaborative cognitive patterns. You're talking about fundamental personality modification, Korath observed, asking us to deny millions of years of evolutionary programming. Not deny, Marcus corrected gently. Just set aside temporarily, the way a soldier learns to suppress their survival instincts to protect civilians, or a parent learns to put their child's needs before their own. You're not changing who you are, just expanding what you're capable of. Over the following hours, the discussion delved into practical matters. How would access to the trials be managed? How would the knowledge be distributed? What protocols would govern joint research efforts? How could they ensure that the Gardener's legacy truly benefited all galactic civilizations? The humans proposed a radical solution. A new international organization based on the principles they had discovered in the Gardener archives. Instead of the traditional hierarchy based on military or economic power, This new body would operate on consensus building and collaborative decision-making. The Gardeners' records suggest they governed their entire civilization through what they called symphonic consensus. "Doctor," Kim explained, "every voice was heard, every perspective considered, every decision made for the benefit of the whole." "And how," asked Nick skeptically, "would such a system handle conflicts between species with fundamentally incompatible interests?" "By finding alternatives that serve everyone's needs instead of forcing someone to lose," Marcus replied. "It's not about compromise, where everyone gets a little of what they want. It's about innovation that gives everyone more than they thought was possible." The debate continued for days. Traditional power structures throughout the galaxy were being questioned for the first time in millennia. The discovery that cooperation might be more evolutionarily advanced than competition was forcing entire civilizations to reconsider their fundamental assumptions. As the sessions progressed, something remarkable began to happen. Delegates who had never spoken directly to each other started having quiet conversations in the corridors. Species that had been enemies for generations began finding common ground in their shared fascination with the Gardner legacy. The turning point came when Ambassador Vex Tar made an unexpected announcement. "The Crithian Empire formally requests human assistance in establishing a joint research facility on Kepler Prime. We want to learn how to think the way you do." The admission sent shockwaves through the chamber. The Crithians had been the galaxy's dominant military power for 3 millennia. Their request for help from the primitive humans would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "More than that," Vex Tar continued, "we propose that this research facility become the headquarters for the new galactic organization proposed by the human delegation. If we are to learn the Gardeners' ways, we must start by abandoning the old ways of thinking about power and dominance." One by one, other delegates began making similar declarations. The Altarian war clans requested human advisors to help develop new approaches to conflict resolution. The Serpentine hegemony asked for assistance in redesigning their educational systems to emphasize cooperation over competition. Even the notoriously xenophobic Andromedian Collective expressed interest in joint cultural exchange programs. Chen found herself overwhelmed by the response. We never intended to become teachers or leaders. We're just as new to all of this as everyone else." "Which is exactly why you're qualified," said General Korath, surprising everyone with his insight. "You haven't spent millennia perfecting ways of thinking that turn out to be counterproductive. You can help us learn to think differently because you never learned to think the wrong way in the first place." Marcus stood for what he hoped would be his final address to the assembly. The Gardeners waited 50,000 years to find minds that could understand their message, but I don't think they were waiting specifically for humans. They were waiting for anyone willing to set aside their preconceptions and try to learn something new. He looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces, seeing genuine curiosity where there had once been skepticism or hostility. Maybe the real test isn't whether you can think like a human. Maybe it's whether any of us can learn to think like Gardeners. The seed pod that Marcus had retrieved from the trial had been growing under careful observation for 3 months. As he spoke, it began to pulse with a gentle light visible throughout the chamber. Dr. Rodriguez had theorized that it was responding to the emotional resonance of the moment, a galaxy full of apex predators choosing cooperation over conquest. The Gardeners' records suggest that consciousness itself evolves, Dr. Kim added. Physical evolution brought us to where we are, but consciousness evolution determines where we go next. They believed that any species could make the transition from predatory thinking to gardening thinking, given the right motivation and guidance. As the formal sessions concluded, and delegates began making plans for the new cooperative initiatives, Chen found herself standing beside the holographic display of the trial network. Each structure was now fully active, broadcasting welcome signals that could be detected from anywhere in the galaxy. Marcus joined her, still carrying the seed pod that had become a symbol of humanity's unexpected role in galactic affairs. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said quietly. "What's that?" 6 months ago, we were the new kids, trying to find our place in a galaxy full of species that were stronger, faster, and more advanced than us. Now we're apparently the teachers." Chen smiled. "Maybe that was always our place. Maybe the reason humans never became apex predators is because we were meant to become something else entirely. The seed pod pulsed again, and through the transparent walls of the structure on Kepler Prime, they could see the first mixed species research teams beginning their work together. Humans, Crithians, Altarians, and dozens of other species, all learning to think in new ways. After 50,000 years of waiting, the gardener's vision of a cooperative galaxy was finally beginning to take root, and it had started with one human who had walked into an impossible test and asked the simple question, "What if I'm not supposed to fight this at all?" The answer had changed everything.